Does the Bible say anything about current events? It certainly does.
It's our focus to be culturally relevant and to communicate a perspective from the Scriptures.
As Christians, we should have a biblical perspective of the news and be able to share that perspective with others.
Hello, I'm Rob Fields, Executive Director of the Leaders of Faith Foundation and co-host on the show with Pastor Larry Bird. We're delighted to have you join today's news and biblical views. Our culture today is bombarding us with a message of hurt, pain, and despair. You may be troubled or experiencing these very struggles we read or see in today's news. Well, we're here today to share with you some hope and good news in the midst of all these tensions we face. Jesus of Nazareth extends the greatest opportunity for mankind who are weary and burdened in life. He says, "Come and find rest for your soul by placing yourself under His care and His divine wisdom." We can all trade in our heavy, tiring burdens by learning from Him today. Today we're going to talk about creating jobs and eliminating poverty. There is a lot in the news about people needing jobs and even the unemployed. And this brings an incredible amount of stress and concern to the table. This is not just something we're facing here in our country. Should we, even in the United States, be concerned about people in other countries, especially when there are so many who need jobs in the U.S.? How can we as followers of Jesus play a part in transforming lives and bringing people hope? Well, these are just some of the questions, and we're going to work through that in our conversation today. I'm delighted today also to have David Sims with us, who is the managing partner and founder of Talentin. And we're going to be discussing about this pretty big topic of jobs and eliminating poverty. I'm sure all ears and all hands on deck is like, you got the solution to this, but we're going to work through and navigate through that. But David, glad that you're here. Can you tell us just a little bit about yourself and also where Jesus became a part of your life in that transformation process there?
Sure. Well, Rob, let me first start by saying thank you. Really appreciate the chance to have this conversation, and it's a critical topic to just talk about jobs and what do we do to really help people in poverty. So I appreciate this opportunity. When you ask me to talk about myself, it's pretty interesting to me how the Lord had a very different way to grab a hold of me, in that He gifted me as a very good student, and I did very well in high school, and He took me to Wharton and Penn. I did a double degree at Penn, which I did well enough there to get to Harvard. And there's a book written that talks about finding God at Harvard. Well, the Lord got me to Harvard as somebody that was very puffed up, proud of myself, I had done well. But then there's a movie called The Paper Chase, which some of your viewers back in time will remember. It's about a first-year law school professor that terrorized students to prove to them how stupid and inadequate they are. And that's what they do. And on first day at Harvard, class 2, criminal law, guess who was proven to be that stupid? That was what the Lord used me, along with a hallmate who invited me to come to church at Memorial Church at Harvard Yard, and I accepted Christ my very first weekend at Harvard. That was the beginning of my relationship with Him in a serious way. I'd attended church, but I didn't know Him as my Lord and Savior. And from there, I went on to work at Bain & Company. Mitt Romney hired me. Some of your viewers will know that name as well. And then on to lead several different businesses. I had the joy of being a CEO in multiple places. And along this journey, we'll talk about how the Lord led me to work in the developing world as well.
Yeah, well, it's fabulous. I always enjoy hearing people's stories. No two stories alike, and where we find Jesus in the least likely places as well. You know, as I was saying, there is a lot in the news about needing jobs and unemployment rates going up in double digits and fluctuating. Can you speak to this need and what people are facing today?
Yeah, jobs are an absolute critical part of how the Lord made us. I can take us all the way back to Genesis, right? And before the fall, God gave us a job, and that job was work. We were to work the earth and multiply, make it productive. So work is part of our DNA from the very beginning. The pandemic and the shutdowns have only made the need for jobs in this country even more apparent. I think it's been in the headlines now for 6, 7, 8 months. And all across the globe, the same thing. And interesting, Rob, Gallup, the organization that does polling, Jim Clifton, their CEO, did a poll a number of years ago across all the countries in the world. And the single biggest thing they found across every place in the world is what the whole world wants is a job. So Gallup has the data to prove that it's not just that individually, but corporately across the globe, people want and need jobs.
Yeah, well said on that. So we're all very attentive on that. You know, you do work in a very specific area, but not also just in the U.S., but also abroad. How would you say is job creation and unemployment needs being dealt with overseas that may help us today? You know, we've seen the pandemic, but we're in a global market. Unemployment does exist overseas, right? And the need for jobs. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's some good news and there's some challenging news overseas. So the truth is, we read headlines in this country that talk about the number of people that are unemployed. What we don't see generally in the headlines here is that the number of hundreds of millions of people that routinely don't have jobs in the developing world, and people don't understand the magnitude of the need for jobs. People in this country, because so many of us get a paycheck from an organization. And when I say, well, do you know that in many countries on earth, people, the adults, only 10, 15, maybe 20% of the people get a paycheck. The rest of them are farmers or hustle economy, people that have to be doing tiny businesses of some sort in order to try and create a place where they can have food for their families. So this need for jobs is huge. And without jobs, that sort of income need isn't there to get their kids in school or to be able to do the other things that we spend money on, food and shelter and clothing, security. So that's the challenge over there. The good news is that we're finding some fabulous entrepreneurs, faith-driven leaders that are saying we can do better. We can find a way that we can bring our resources, our talents to the table, our time and talents to actually create jobs through businesses. And that's where we're seeing some real encouraging signs in the developing world that I think we could do better here in the States too.
Yeah, and one of the things I really love about our discussion today too is I know when we're talking about unemployment and poverty, it's so easy for us to focus on we, the United States. And really, it's taking the focus off of just us. This is something that's going on globally and listening, and that's what you're bringing to the table of what's going on, particularly even the continent of Africa, but globally too. Here's a graphic here. I just want you to kind of share with our viewers what you mean by this. And I love the field of the flowers and beautiful. But can you create 10,000 jobs with these flowers? What do you mean by that?
Well, I would just love your viewers to just ponder that graphic, ponder that question for a moment. Can you create 10,000 jobs? That's a field of, actually, they call them chrysanthemum flowers. They look like daisies, but they're chrysanthemum flowers in Kenya. That happens to be Mary's, a couple of acres that this person that we work through called Mary has fields, and she's growing those flowers. And you see flowers, but she sees a job. And it's because chrysanthemum flowers, when they're grown and then processed through this wonderful client that we have that we work with called Kintegra, they can take those chrysanthemum flowers from 10,000 farmers, 10,000 people like Mary. Those flowers are brought into a plant, and there's something in there that they can create pyrethrum. That's an organic pesticide. So that they take all of those flowers and create this organic pesticide that is in huge demand all across the globe, because those of us that want to eat healthy, if you want to eat organic food, you can't be spraying chemicals on the crops that we eat. So those flowers turned into an organic pesticide, pyrethrum, through this company, Kintegra. And we work with Kintegra, and Kintegra works with 10,000 farmers that are turning those flowers into jobs. And Rob, the thing we like so much is every acre of those flowers can create $100 of revenue per month for every one of those farmers. That's a minimum wage job in Kenya, $100 a month from 1 acre of flowers.
Wow, that's a great story and a great example of that. David, we're going to take a break and we're going to come back and continue our discussion as we're going to be looking at creating jobs and eliminating poverty and some things that we can learn even today here in the U.S. and then also what's going on abroad too. We'll be back right after this message. Welcome back to today's News and Biblical Views. And today we're talking about creating jobs and eliminating poverty. And I have a guest here is Dave Sims. And it's wonderful to hear on how job creation gets promoted. So my question here is, when you're talking about eliminating poverty, if I'm understanding correctly, it's through job creation. Tell me a little bit more about that, because what a great solution, because there's some people that said, well, to eliminate poverty, there are many other solutions on the table, but you're really targeting on the job creation. Yeah.
Yeah, and so many of us, we hear about poverty. That's what tugs at our hearts. That's what Jesus talks about. What are you doing to serve the least of these? But poverty is, in some ways, a symptom. People are poor because they lack income. They lack assets. They lack income or assets because they don't have a job that allows them to create that income. So back in my consulting days, we would have called that, let's go look for the root causes. And all of the things that we look at that we can see the symptoms, and it can be things from poverty to human trafficking to civil strife to those sorts of things. Those things come when people lack hope and they're stuck without the income that give them a chance to have a flourishing, better life. Those things come from jobs. So we focus on, let's help create the jobs. That's how you tackle poverty.
Yeah, and I like it too. It's a God-given mandate too. That was one of the very first things that God gave Adam to do in the garden.
Right.
He created him in his image and likeness, and he says, okay, to work the soil of the ground. And there's job creation. Talk about one of the best job creators was God himself, and giving that task to man. And there's something about that when we work hard, there's a value and esteem that comes through that. Mm-hmm. You know, what is Talenton's role in creating these jobs? In fact, Talenton is a very unusual name. What does it mean? I guess, what's the Latin, the Greek, or we're going to have to specify on that, but tell us a little bit about.
You know, we're going to go see how many Greek scholars there are out there. Talentin is the Greek word for talents, and many of your viewers, I hope, will recognize the parable of the talents. And so when we were looking for something that could name what we're trying to do, the parable of the talents talks about taking what we've been given, and we all aim to be that 5-talent servant that is investing to double the resources the Lord has given us in order to create more kingdom impact. And so Talentin is Greek for that. What we wanted to do was to take that sort of investing and using things wisely and figure out how do we bring that to play to tackle poverty, as we were just talking about. And when we looked at what it takes to do this, the true engines that create jobs, to create wealth, to bring hope, are things called small, medium enterprises. We've just been through an election cycle where people talk about businesses, but they didn't talk about why do you have to focus so much on small businesses. These are businesses that have 10 to 200 employees in general. Well, in this country and all across the globe, some 60% or more of all new jobs that get created will be created by small, medium enterprises. So if we want to tackle job creation to impact poverty, we have to find a way that you can help small businesses grow and thrive. And in the developing world, what we do is we bring them capital and support. We put them through a rigorous due diligence process, and we walk alongside them to take a business that's employing dozens of people today and said, okay, how can you be 5 or 10x that size in the next 3, 4, 5 years? That's what they want to do. That's what we want them to do. That's what the people who need jobs want them to do. Talentin helps there.
Yeah, so kind of you found Talentin a few years ago. What led you to move in this direction and to do just exactly that?
Yeah, so Rob, I've had, in addition to my corporate career, and along the way, I'd been heavily involved in some microfinance work for 30 plus years. And I knew that the power that comes from hope from small businesses, men and women that had a way to sort of make ends meet. But I also saw that it wasn't enough. It wasn't finding a way that those people could be lifted fully out of poverty, have hope, get their kids in school, have better hope for the future. And I knew that that's what we wanted to do, was to take the parable of the talents and still combine it to the very next section of Matthew 25, is where Jesus instructs us that whatever you've done for the least of these, you've done for me. We wanted to give those of us in this country a way to invest to serve the least of these. And Rob, most people here don't realize that almost everybody watching this show today is a 5 talent steward, not a 2 or a 1. Hopefully none are 1s burying their money in the ground. But do you realize that at $33,500 of income, anybody out there that is making $33,500 or more is in the top 5% of all income earners on the planet today? I think by biblical terms that makes all of us 5 talent servants, and the Lord says, what have we done with the talents He's entrusted to us?
Yeah, well said, and very fascinating with the numbers on that too. You know, there's a lot, as we were even talking about in the beginning in the news, about needing jobs. I guess the other question is, and why should those here in the United States, you know, why should we be concerned about people in other countries, especially when there's so many here who need jobs? What would be your answer to that type of thought or process?
Yeah. When I meet somebody like that, I very frequently say, well, join me. Let's go see what poverty looks like in the developing world, because people that haven't yet been there into the kind of places that we work in the rural parts of sub-Saharan Africa and elsewhere, where over my career I've worked in Asia and Latin America, don't understand that in those parts of the world there's no unemployment, there's no safety nets, there's no Medicare, that if you don't work, you don't eat. So the opportunity to actually put food on the table, get kids in school, have access to drinkable water. There's hundreds of millions of people on Earth that don't have indoor plumbing. They don't have electricity. Forget the internet. Those sorts of things are unbelievably hard to imagine for us. But in this pandemic, guess what? All the schools in Kenya were closed at the beginning of the year. One of our clients is a woman that runs 5 Montessori preschools and some elementary schools as well. And because the schools were closed, people here would say, well, go to distance learning. We went to virtual, why can't they? Well, the data in Kenya show that only 12% of the country has access to the internet at home. So go try and do distance learning when there's no opportunity to do that. That's the truth of what poverty looks like in so many of the places that we work. And when the Lord spoke to my heart and said, that parable of the sheep and the goats, whatever you've done for the least of these, you've done for me, that's where we've decided to place our time and our focus, because that's where He's called us to be.
Yeah, and what a great way to, again, not to think about ourselves and offering the hope that we have and the hope to others. And how many times people across the world are looking to the United States as an example and a great opportunity, a venue for us to be a blessing to them, even in the midst of our difficulties and struggles that we're running through. Hey, we're going to take another break, and we're going to come back and continue the discussion. Thank you again for being with us on today's show, and we'll be right back after this message. Welcome back to today's News and Biblical Views, and I'm Rob Fields, co-host also on the show with Pastor Larry Bird, and today we're talking about creating jobs and eliminating poverty. David, I know that there's a lot of challenges that are facing people across the world. In particular, we'll just kind of zoom in on the continent of Africa. I know even this last week I had a conversation with some folks that were in Ethiopia, and farmers not being able to get the harvest because of COVID that's taking place. And the poverty issue that increases because of the jobs and the lack of the unemployment is just what it's doing economically. And doing a shutdown, you know, again, is just, it's hard to, lack of jobs, but then a shutdown. So what do you see in your experiences, and you've traveled in many of these places too, some of the challenges that are facing some of the African nations too?
Yeah, and Rob, I'm going to come back to jobs. That's when I look across Africa, most people, because we're so focused on today and now in the COVID situation, the crisis, they don't understand that there's bigger trends happening. And in Africa, the projections are that between now and 2035, just 15 years out, there will be 450 million people that enter the workforce. There's that many young people already born, growing up, that are going to turn 18 and need jobs. 450 million. Well, all of the statistics that the gurus can say, there'd be 100 million jobs. That's the population of the U.S. left unemployed in Africa. That leads to poverty, refugee flight, human trafficking, all of the ills that can happen when people don't have jobs and work. So I'm going to say the big thing for me is jobs. And when I look at part of the solution to that jobs is we don't have capital to fund those businesses that can create the jobs. And this is called the missing middle. Capital doesn't flow to Africa from Christians and non-Christians. All can be involved in meeting the needs because these businesses are too big for microfinance, too small for commercial banks. So jobs and capital to create the jobs are the linked solutions that I think to address that problem.
You know, you also mentioned about Talentin's investment in Rwanda that was started because of a toddler in a coma with a deaf mother. How did that happen? Can you tell a little bit about that occurrence?
Yeah, we've decided to focus our start of Talentin in Rwanda and Kenya and Uganda, and this is a fun story for me. There was an American who read a story about a toddler in a coma, and the toddler in the coma couldn't be helped because the mother was deaf. And he sold his business, moved from Washington State to Rwanda, and looked for a business to start, and started this company called Masaka Creamery. And he said the Lord led him to do that, and he knew that whatever he did to start that business, he wanted to hire that toddler's mom. Well, it turns out the toddler's mom, being deaf, had in her life been marginalized, abused, abandoned, just all of the things that we just grate against. And John Porter is his name. He said, I'm going to do something about that. And he founded Masaka Creamery, gave her a job sweeping floors because she didn't even know sign language, connected her with a church who taught her sign language. She wasn't deaf. I mean, she wasn't dumb, she was deaf, meaning she wasn't stupid. And with sign language, she had a chance to actually grow up. And today that woman, Nyanya, is a quality control specialist at the factory. And as if that weren't enough, half of the 45 employees at this factory are deaf employees, taught sign language. Everybody in the factory is taught sign language. They do Bible studies in sign language. And this one company is sourcing dairy product, raw milk, from 2,000 farmers to provide even more jobs across the landscape of Rwanda. That's the kind of thing that just makes us so proud to be doing the work the Lord's called us to do.
Yeah, that's spectacular on that, to see lives transformed like that. So speaking of kind of lives transformed, so how can we as even Christians play a part in transforming lives and bringing people hope?
Yeah, and I'm a huge fan of just seeing where the Lord has called you. But if this conversation about what can you do to actually personally be involved in tackling poverty in a meaningful way, we'd invite any of your listeners to come learn more at talentinllc.com. I have on there a document, little downloadable document people can download, and says how to eliminate poverty. And that'll just go into much more detail than we've had a chance to describe today. People can learn what the Lord is doing and then see how they could be involved in helping create jobs in order to tackle poverty.
Yeah. Now, and you mentioned a few passages in Scripture that really are just the hallmark of what we've been talking about. Any others that come to your mind or that you would really just want to highlight of some hope that we find in the Scriptures dealing about poverty and job creation?
Well, the ones we've talked about are there. I think if we take people to Isaiah, there's so many chapters of Isaiah that just talked about what's the fast that I've called of you. It's to sort of it's to serve the least of these, or I'll take us all to Micah 6:8. And, you know, what are we called to do but to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God? And I think when you dwell on that passage, the do justice, love mercy, I think that's all about tackling how do we make a difference in the lives of the kind of people that we've been talking about today, those that are some of the very least, and meditating more on that passage in Matthew 25 and wrestling with parable of the talents, and now recognize I'm a 5-talent servant. Whatever you've done for the least of these, you've done for me. How do I put those two things together in my own life? And I find just spending time in Scripture and meditating on those is just a fabulous way for people to see where the Lord will direct their steps. So,
yeah, a wonderful heart. I just appreciate so much with what you've been saying and sharing. Again, the value of what we've been talking about, not just thinking about ourselves. Of course, many of us are going through some very trying times, whether without a job and the poverty issue, but how we can still be a blessing to others as well. So thank you so much, David, for just being with us and having this wonderful conversation today.
Well, thanks, Rob.
Well, Proverbs 22:2 gives us this perspective. Rich and poor have this in common. The Lord is the maker of them all. You know, Jesus did teach us on a number of occasions about wealth and about riches. And he taught that we should use the material things for future spiritual benefits. It's not always about ourselves. And are you managing the riches that God has given to you for His purposes? In fact, are people benefiting from the graces that God has poured out into your life and my life? Of course, we have material items in order to provide food, shelter, and other comforts of life. It's far too easy to mismanage the finances given to us from the Lord. Have you made Jesus the focal point of your life? Have you invited Him to come into your heart and to deliver you from the bondage of sin? He died on the cross for you. He rose victorious over death and the penalty of sin. Would you trust in what He accomplished was for you today? Thank you for being with us on today's News and Biblical Views.